Peace be with you, brothers and sisters. Thank you for joining us at Mother and Refuge of the End Times. This is part 2 of How Did You Fare at Boot Camp by Daniel O'Connor. In the first episode, we covered checklist numbers 1 through 4, Daniel O'Connor's 5th checklist point. Did you fail to stand up and be counted for fear of reprisals? It matters not how insignificant you think you are. There are people looking to your example for encouragement. From the perspective of eternity, and as far as the standards of Judgment Day are concerned, it does not matter if you are a social media influencer with millions of followers or an ordinary grandmother whose views are only known by a few other people. We answer only for what we choose to do with the sphere of influence Providence has provided us, not the magnitude of that sphere. If you cannot oppose and publicly speak out against the tyranny we have seen these last 2 years, then what, pray tell, can you stand against? Let me confess, though I've long been critical of them, I've nevertheless also long hesitated to openly state that I have chosen to reject these COVID vaccines for myself. Doing so exposes me to all sorts of new attacks and accusations, which I already must endure a steady stream of. So I timidly remained quiet and carefully worded my posts, videos, etc. in such a way that, as much as I cautioned about the COVID vaccines, I never explicitly revealed my own vaccination status. In my last post, that changed. As I finally realized that I cannot keep this quiet anymore, people may be struggling themselves and feel the need to know what choice I made for myself as they undertake their own discernment. So after much prayer, I decided to stand up and be counted and announce for the world to see that I am not vaccinated for COVID and that I will not get vaccinated for COVID. If you've cowered in your room for the last 2 years, strategically ensuring that no one can find out what you really believe about important matters, then it is time to man up. It is time to stand up and be counted. Each indeed may be called to do so in a different way. But in case any need some suggestions, I'll offer some. Start a blog, a Facebook page, a Twitter account, or a YouTube channel. Proclaim Christ therein. Proclaim His full truth, including those truths of which are detested by the modern world, that He, Jesus Christ, is the only path to the Father, that He established one and only one church, the Catholic Church, that any and all sexual activity outside of the valid marriage of one man and one woman is intrinsically and gravely evil, that abortion must be outlawed, etc. Proclaim that Jesus Christ and all the sacraments He instituted are necessary and that you cannot and will not comply with any future mandates that seek to prevent you from receiving them. Proclaim His kingdom. Be a divine will missionary of mercy. Pray outside of a Planned Parenthood. Oppose vaccine mandates. Oppose lockdowns. Oppose mask mandates. In a word, oppose communism. Voting wisely is not enough. One bold witness to the truth, even if he is not a popular one with a following, is worth 1,000 votes for the right candidate. The famous adage, "Evil prevails only when good men are silent," is a quote I have seen being attributed to virtually every wise figure history has graced us with. But whoever was actually first to say it does not matter. It is clearly true. Silence means consent. Are you implicitly consenting to the present dictatorship of relativism and culture of death, which have dominated the world for so many decades now, but have reached a pinnacle in the last couple of years? Withdraw your consent. No more silence. Stand up and be counted. Checkpoint number 6. Did you cower in your room for fear of mandates and restrictions and the penalties ostensibly affixed to their violation, even when violating them was clearly willed by God? Let me be the first to admit that I wish I was bolder in many ways during the last 2 years, as is so often the case with this post's examination of conscience and elsewhere. If I give advice, it's precisely because I need to hear it myself. But I will share one brief story here of when I did not fail, in order to encourage you to do likewise when similar situations arise. In the early months of the pandemic, my grandmother was in the nursing home dying of COVID. She was among the thousands of people that my godless former government, Andrew Cuomo, essentially murdered by seeding coronavirus within the state's senior care facilities. At that time, visitors to nursing homes were strictly prohibited statewide. There was no way I could go visit my dying grandmother. Well, I went anyway. Here is the astoundingly complicated strategy I used. I picked up my keys, got in my car, drove to the nursing home, and walked in the door. Many of my relatives did so, and it was their example that inspired me to do likewise. No one stopped us. I was able to kneel by my grandmother's bedside and pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet just minutes before she died. See what Jesus told St. Faustina about the enormous graces given to the dying when the chaplet is recited by their bedsides. And then consider what would have been neglected if, cowering in fear of these evil and unlawful restrictions, abominable in the eyes of God, that dare attempt to deprive a dying soul of her inalienable right to be ministered to in her dying moments. I simply said, "Okay, I comply. I submit. I'll be a good boy and sit in my room while my grandmother dies, because some incarnate demon politician says that I must do so." So enough being a good boy sitting on the lap of mommy and daddy government. You are a child of God, a son or daughter of the King of all. Act like it. We are not in the era of peace yet. We are in the time of war, and each of us is called to be a soldier for Christ the King. Proclaim his name and do his will, no matter the cost. Your reward will be great in heaven. Now, I am not here attempting to approve, for example, some teenager who, fighting for his right to party, decides to violate government restrictions so he can go clubbing, whether or not prudence is found in policies that close clubs, cancel concerts, or similarly curtail merely recreational activities. I would not advocate for risking criminal punishment simply so that you can carouse the way you like to. But when the government dares to try to prevent us from doing that which virtue demands, then failing to undertake these deeds is a sin of omission, which is a sin nonetheless, and no government may ever mandate sins of commission or omission. If we had the faintest clue of how powerfully God's grace is present in our works of mercy, our worshiping at the Mass, our gathering with our faithful to pray outside of the Mass, etc., then our consciences would be properly formed in accordance with this knowledge. Our consciences would then demand us to accomplish these and other deeds, and would never allow for their cessation merely because the government says so. If the relatively puny penalties that we were threatened with stopped us from being the Christians we are called to be these past 2 years, then the severe persecution that is about to arise will certainly compel us to apostatize. So remind yourself of what the faith teaches on this point and strengthen your resolve to act accordingly. From 2 Timothy 3:12. Indeed, all who desire to live a godly life in Jesus Christ will be persecuted. From Matthew 5:10, Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And from Philippians 3:8-9. I count everything as a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Jesus Christ my Lord. For his sake I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish, in order that I may gain Christ